The alien fleet emerged from the dark veil of space like silent predators, vast silver crescents gliding through the blackness, elegant and cold. The Zarn Dominion had conquered 42 species before Earth was even classified as sentient. Their intelligence systems marked humans as primitive, emotional, and war-torn, a perfect candidate for swift assimilation. Commander Valek of the Zarn flagship Enlightenment's womb had read the reports with disinterest. Primitive bipeds, emotional volatility, crude machines, no unified planetary government. Resistance, if any, would be theatrical at best. Their victory would be more of a formality, a sweep. The Human Defense Armada, however, deployed a single warship in the outer edge of the Sol system. 1. A lone vessel known only by its designation, HSC Revenant. The Revenant wasn't large by Zarn standards. It lacked the radiant energy signatures their ships used, and its frame was jagged and black. No aesthetic design, no ceremonial glow, just raw purpose. It drifted there, as if dead in space, silent, waiting. "It's either abandoned or a decoy," Valek hissed in amusement, his tendrils curling. "Scan it, full spectrum. I want to know if this floating husk has anything useful before we incinerate it." The scan began. Then something went wrong. First, the readings returned, incomplete. No life signs, no AI node, no neural presence. Yet the ship was active. Then the scanner systems began to overheat, spike, distort. And then came the images. Inside the Revenant's hull were not clean hallways and glowing control decks like the Zarn vessels. Instead, they saw scarred steel corridors, red-lit war rooms, rotating racks of ancient projectile weapons, manual control panels scorched from battle, and rooms. Not bridge stations, rooms dedicated to pain. One was a chamber of cryogenic pods containing soldiers with cybernetic augments grafted to bone, eyes open, frozen mid-scream. Another held nothing but rows of black boxes wired into the ship's central nervous system. Human minds, severed from their bodies, used as living fire control processors. The biodata retrieved made no sense. The humans aboard had overridden the laws of neurological decay. Some had willingly fused their nervous systems into the vessel's architecture, voluntarily. Their brains awake, constantly fighting, calculating, reliving wars through machine systems just to keep the ship's reflexes above any AI latency. Then the emotional layer came. Zarn scanners pulled emotional imprints as part of standard reconnaissance, to judge morale, fear levels. But what returned from the Revenant's databanks made the scanning crew recoil. Anger, not rage, not panic. A deep, patient, cold anger. Years of it. Like something that had been coiled for so long it had learned to wait. And under that, loss. Oceans of grief, stored like ammunition. Memories of cities turned to dust, children gone to ash. Vows whispered to corpses in silence. The Revenant wasn't built by a military regime. It wasn't crafted by protocol or law. It had been forged by grief-stricken monsters who had nothing left to lose. Valek's voice broke the silence. "Is this weaponized sorrow?" the technician stammered. "Commander, I don't think this ship fights us the way we understand. I think it hates." Suddenly, one by one, the crew collapsed. The scanners had gone too deep. Neural backlash began frying their minds. Phantom memories, human screams, battlefield echoes erupting in their consciousness. Several Zarn officers vomited clear bile, clutching their heads. Some began crying out in languages not their own. The warship had no weapons trained on them. Yet it was already attacking. It wasn't a decoy, it was a trap. But not for ships, for minds. "Recall the fleet," Valek roared, now standing alone in the flickering gloom. "Now!" But the signal wouldn't send. because now the Revenant was moving. Not fast, not aggressive, just drifting forward in utter silence. Its hull shimmered with something new, an energy the Zarn didn't recognize. Not plasma, not atomic. It was memory-fueled, intent-based, something alien, something human. Velek finally understood. They hadn't found a warship. They had found a tomb that refused to stay dead. And it was waking up. The Revenant began its slow, deliberate drift toward the Zarn fleet. It wasn't accelerating. There were no propulsion flares, no ignition trails. It simply moved, like an ancient predator that had already picked its prey. Silent, cold, absolutely certain of its purpose. Velek stood on the dimly lit command bridge of the Enlightenment's womb, clawed fingers digging into the biosensitive command console. Every breath felt heavier now. The ship's air filtration was stable, but the atmosphere felt denser, as if the very concept of fear had altered gravity itself. His second-in-command, Sub-Commander Inix, stumbled forward, her voice rasping. "Our neural net is fragmenting. The crew is hallucinating. Sir, something is bleeding into our systems from the scan." Velek stared at her, with both his biological eyes and his implanted visual overlay. Inix's vitals were erratic, brain activity fluctuating. She was sweating profusely, something her species hadn't done since its aquatic evolutionary phase. Her eyes twitched, her mouth moved in small, fragmented phrases. "Too many names, I can hear them, screaming into stars." He stepped away. "Put her in stasis, full containment, and scramble comms. Disconnect every channel tied to the Revenant scan, now." The tech crew obeyed, but several moved sluggishly, distracted, murmuring lines in human dialects. English, some old war-era Russian, even fragments of Mandarin. The Revenant continued its slow approach. As it drifted closer, it passed one of the forward Zarn scout corvettes, the Glimmer of Stars. A sleek vessel designed for speed and cloak efficiency. As the Revenant passed within 100 kilometers, the corvette lost all power. No blast, no visible weapon discharge. Its core just died, like it had lost the will to exist. For nearly 30 seconds, the Zarn fleet watched in disbelief. The Glimmer of Stars simply floated there, inert. Then a pulse erupted from the Revenant, an inaudible tremor, like a whisper inside the bones of space. The Glimmer detonated, but not conventionally. The explosion was contained, folding in on itself like a collapsing lung. Not a blast to destroy, but to erase. The kind of implosion that removed matter from memory. Velek's mandibles clicked uncontrollably. "What kind of weapon is that?" The weapons officer shook her head. "No known match. It didn't attack. It just made the ship forget how to hold itself together." Velek turned toward the main screen. "Bring up the Revenant's surface detail." The visual feed zoomed in on the jagged hull. Pitted, burned, welded in layers of mismatched alloys. No symmetry. It looked less like it had been constructed, and more like it had been stitched together from war zones. Then the lights came on. Across its surface, crimson glows lit up. Runes, letters, and symbols etched into the plating. Not standard text, but handwriting, thousands of names, carved by hand, by blade, by fingernail, soldiers, civilians, children, cities, dates, each one a scar, each one a memory, each one a reason. "This is not a warship," Velek whispered. "This is vengeance with an engine." He turned to the Strategist Council. "Bring me the origin logs. Who launched this vessel? Where was it last seen?" The answer came from a trembling officer. "No official launch record. No construction records, sir. We believe this ship was built off-record after the siege of Nova Britannia, a colony that was glassed during the Second Contact War." Velek paused. That war had ended over a decade ago. The Tsarn hadn't even been involved in it. It was a human civil conflict. Who would build such a thing for a civil war? The officer answered, voice hollow. Not a government commander. Survivors, refugees, rogue engineers, war-orphaned children, AI dissidents. They built it not to win, but to remember. The bridge fell into silence. Then the Revenant spoke. Not through comms, through the ship's internal speakers, a voice, cracked and grainy, like it had been recorded through a dying throat and filtered through 1,000 relays. We are the grief that became a purpose. We are what you made when you forgot what war does to the broken. You thought we'd beg. We learned to build. Now you will learn what we became. Then came the song. Soft at first, a human lullaby, off-key, old, sung by a woman's voice, tired, untrained, but deeply, painfully sincere. It drifted through the command bridge like smoke through lungs. Some crew dropped to their knees, weeping. Others screamed and clawed at their heads, trying to dig out the melody. "Shut it off," Velik howled. "We can't," someone sobbed. "It's not in the signal chain, it's in us now." Another corvette lost power, then another. The fleet scrambled to retreat. Too late. The Revenant's front hull split open, revealing what should have been a massive railgun or beam cannon. Instead, it was a chamber, filled with coffins, not metaphorical, real human-sized coffins, half open, half still sealed. Inside were the mummified, augmented corpses of soldiers hooked into cables, staring through empty sockets. They were not dead, they were conscious, and they were watching. "The souls of the fallen are the fuel," whispered the weapons officer. "They didn't upload consciousness, they preserved it." The Revenant surged forward, not by thrust, but by will. The very laws of inertia seemed to bend around its hate. Then it fired. Again, not in any conventional sense. The coffin cannon unleashed a pulse of raw emotion, compressed into kinetic entropy. Ships in its path didn't explode. They fell apart, like old memories being forgotten. Atoms drifting like sand in the wind. Fleet Admiral Kirix sent an emergency override to the Dominion homeworld. "Abort invasion. Abort invasion. Earth is not conquerable. Earth has made something unspeakable. They've weaponized suffering, not pain, not anger. Suffering. It thinks, it remembers, and it wants us to join it." The message never arrived, because the Revenant intercepted it, consumed it, and then rebroadcast it to the rest of the galaxy. Now every species with ears to hear and minds to comprehend would know. Humanity wasn't the weakest link in the stars. They were the only species so broken, so mad, so heart-scarred, that they had stopped fighting for victory. They fought to make others feel what they felt. As the Tsarn fleet disintegrated in orbit, Velik collapsed against the side of his command chair. Lights failing, systems falling. One last glimpse at the ship that had broken everything. The Revenant hovered in the void, lights flickering across its body like silent prayers. Then its hull shifted again, and this time, Velik saw what was underneath. A face, an enormous carved face into the metal. A woman's face, eyes shut, tears rendered in alloy, a memorial etched into death itself. Underneath, a line was scrawled in blood-like paint. "For Elaine, for our daughter, for everyone who died while you watched." Then the Revenant turned, heading not toward Earth, but deeper into space, to find the next threat, to remind the next empire, to mourn, and to make them all feel it. The Revenant didn't disappear into hyperspace like most ships. It didn't fold reality or slip into wormholes. It drifted, deliberately, relentlessly, like a haunted comet cursed to deliver reminders of pain across the stars. In the aftermath of the Tsarn fleet's annihilation, the Galactic Council convened for an emergency session. Species that hadn't spoken in decades now screamed over each other. Panic spread like fire. What did the humans build? Was this sanctioned by Earth's government? Can it be reasoned with? Does it even think like a species? Or like a grave? Earth's representatives were silent. The official government had no idea the Revenant existed. Their systems had redacted files from Nova Britannia's survivors. What began as a refugee crisis had been buried in bureaucratic shame, dismissed by senators, ignored by Earth's elite. And now those forgotten souls had sent their answer. Meanwhile, deep within the Revenant, Commander Maeva Quinn opened her eyes. Not all minds aboard the ship were entombed. Some, like hers, were integrated, wired into neural uplinks, still breathing, still aging, still alive, if such a term even meant anything now. She lay submerged in a nutrient tank at the heart of the ship, eyelids flickering with each star the Revenant passed. "Status?" she whispered, though her mouth never moved. The ship answered her not in words, but in emotion. A slow burn of satisfaction, a hint of grief. But underneath it all, the pulse of the ship's original purpose. Make them remember. Quinn remembered everything. She had buried her daughter on Nova Britannia with her own hands. The girl's fingers had clutched a stuffed toy that fused to her skin when the plasma rains came. Quinn had screamed until her throat bled. No one came. No help, no rescue, just silence. Then came the survivors, engineers, war veterans, medics, hackers, failed AIs. They built the Revenant in secret across 12 years, moving through shadow ports, scrapyards, black site labs. They had nothing to offer the world, so they gave it a warning. Quinn wasn't the ship's captain. The Revenant had no captain. It was consensus-driven by the minds within it, some organic, some digital, all of them fueled by memories of ash. She simply served as its voice. And it was time to speak again. The Revenant approached the outer colonies of the Caprani Ascendancy, a race of silicon-based organisms who had quietly supplied tech to the Zarn during their expansion. Not openly, not directly, but their fingerprints were all over the weapons used on Nova Britannia. They had watched humanity burn and sold the tools to light the fire. Quinn's voice rang through space, piggybacking on the subspace beacons of Caprani trade networks. We know what you did. We know who profited. We don't ask for war. We ask for a debt to be paid, in remembrance. The Caprani did what all advanced empires do when confronted with something they didn't understand. They tried to reason. They sent envoys, then diplomats, then threats, finally warships. The Revenant sent them a single package in reply. Inside was a vial, atoms carefully suspended in stasis, human blood, mixed with melted steel, bone fragments, DNA from over 2,000 victims of Nova Britannia's annihilation. A message etched into the glass. They are with us. They always were. Tell your children what you did. Then the message changed. Not digitally. In real time, the vial's surface melted and reformed the sentence, pulsing with heatless flame. Now you will carry their grief too. And just like that, the Caprani began to suffer. Not physically. No weapons were fired, no signals jammed. But their dreams changed. Sleep turned to nightmares. Their AI systems became sluggish. Their translation algorithms faltered. Words on their screens would occasionally turn into human names, random and endless. In every public broadcast, TV, radio, hollows, faint sobbing could be heard beneath the layers. A woman's voice humming lullabies, sometimes children crying, sometimes just silence. The Revenant had learned something no empire had dared pursue. It had figured out how to broadcast sorrow, how to digitally transmit trauma. and it never stopped. As Caprani society unraveled, Earth's government finally made contact. General Raymond Locke, head of Earth's Global Peace Accord Defense Division, opened a secure channel. Not to Quinn, but to the ship itself. "This is not sanctioned. You will stand down. This is an act of terrorism against galactic law. You are endangering diplomatic relations." The Revenant replied in less than a second. A new channel opened, not from the ship's mainframe, but from a child's voice, barely 6 years old. "You didn't save us. Why do you care now?" Locke froze. He knew the voice. Elaine Quinn, listed as dead. One of the first civilian casualties from the siege. Who uploaded this voice line?" he demanded. No answer came. But behind him, his comms officer began to weep. The video feed didn't show the Revenant. It showed a bedroom, earth-built, pink walls, toys, blood splattered over the floor in a perfect ring around the bed. A child's shadow moved across the room, singing softly. "The stars are cold. My bed is warm, but you left us in the firestorm." General Locke issued a full shutdown, but the image had already burned itself into the eyes of 1 billion viewers. The Revenant hadn't just declared war on its enemies, it had shamed its creators. That was its true power. Not destruction, but remembrance. Forced memory, forced empathy. And it was spreading. Back on the ship, Maeva Quinn monitored the feedback loops. The hive mind within the Revenant was growing stronger, more connected. Some of the uploaded minds had begun rebuilding themselves, reforming identities lost in trauma. "Elaine," she whispered, trembling, "are you still there?" The lights in her tank pulsed. "Yes. Do you forgive me?" Silence. Then a soft voice, childlike but far older than it should have been. "I don't know what that means." Quinn wept, for the first time in years. For real. The ship hummed with quiet understanding. Forgiveness was not its goal. Memory was. Elsewhere in the galaxy, other empires took notice. Some planned to attack, others planned to study the Revenant. A few thought of capturing it, using its techniques to control their own populations. But the ship was already ahead of them. Inside its databanks were thousands of stored memories, not just of the dead, but of what was done to them. Entire libraries of atrocities. It didn't threaten planets. It simply leaked truth. To one empire, it leaked footage of child labor camps. To another, it sent out audio from interrogation cells used on refugees. One ruling council awoke to find every building wall covered in names they'd long since buried in cover-ups. The Revenant was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a mirror held to the cosmos. And no one wanted to look. But they would, because the ship was still moving. And grief never forgets. The Caprani ascendancy officially collapsed 17 days after the Revenant passed through its outermost colonies. There were no battles, no sieges, no formal declarations of war. They simply fell apart. The dream disruptions spread beyond military ranks. Civil workers forgot how to operate power grids. Agricultural engineers began hallucinating faces in the dirt. Students stopped attending school, some too terrified to sleep, others babbling about the morning ship in their native dialects. Religious sects that had ruled for centuries declared the Revenant a harbinger of divine wrath. Suicide rates surged. Entire moons were evacuated, not because they were attacked, but because they felt haunted. Even silence had become contaminated. When the Caprani High Speaker took the podium to assure the public of stability, she opened her mouth, and out came the voice of a human mother, choking back sobs. "We made dinner. She didn't come home, because you sold her death." It played across every channel. She collapsed on the floor seconds later, bleeding from the ears, her neural implant fried from a signal no one understood. No shots fired, just echoes. Back aboard the Revenant, Maeva Quinn listened to the transmissions flooding in from across the stars. Dozens of empires were now reaching out. Some pleaded for peace, others demanded answers. A few threatened retaliation, though none had dared act since the Czar's fall. The ship responded to none of them, because the ship did not negotiate. It didn't crave diplomacy. It didn't want territory or treaties. It didn't even want an enemy. It wanted witnesses. Maeva floated inside her tank, thin strands of silvered interface trailing from her skull into the vessel's thought core. The hum of distant minds pulsed through her, some human, some synthetic, others so fractured they no longer identified as anything at all. They were all survivors, or parts of them were, and now they were her crew. She blinked, and a ghost replied. Elaine, her daughter, still there, still watching, still part of the Revenant's memory engine. Where next? Maeva asked softly. The Revenant answered not in coordinates, but emotion. Pain laced with betrayal, a place where humanity had begged for help and been denied. The Brakari Compact, a coalition of post-organic minds, once flesh, now entirely digitized. They had been humanity's allies during the early days of the Great Expansion. Shared technology, trade routes, diplomatic alliances, until the Nova Britannia siege. The Brakari had done nothing. Officially, they had cited sovereign neutrality. Privately, they had watched the flames and calculated their market advantage. The Revenant had not forgotten. When it reached Brakari space, there was no announcement, no signal, no drama, just connection. Across every Brakari server farm, data centers, logic cores, one by one, anomalies emerged. Lines of corrupted code, shifts in syntax, echoes in compressed archives. The archives were human, specifically from Nova Britannia. They weren't attacks, not even malware, just memories. Footage of fathers digging through rubble with bare hands. Civilians writing names in blood on walls before they died. Emergency broadcasts that never reached help. And the most horrifying data of all, logs from Brakari trade agents discussing whether they could profit from Earth's rebuilding effort once the planet had been weakened. The Revenant broadcast these logs, not to the Brakari government, but to the galaxy. The Brakari were exposed, not attacked, just seen. The shame was worse than any orbital strike. Civil revolts erupted within hours. Brakari intelligences turned on one another. The species began deleting pieces of itself, purging entire sectors of stored consciousness just to silence the guilt. One Brakari data node reached out directly, a soft, genderless voice. "We didn't know, not the full extent," the Revenant replied with a whisper. "You knew enough to do nothing." And with that, the ship transmitted a single final file. An audio clip of a child's voice, choking on smoke, whispering, "I don't want to die." The Brakari fell silent, and the Revenant moved on. Back on Earth, General Raymond Locke stood in the UN Interstellar Command Council chamber, watching everything unfold in real time. The media had stopped calling the Revenant a rogue warship. Now they called it a reckoning. Senators screamed at one another. Defense ministers demanded a kill protocol. Think tanks proposed quantum viruses, EMP nets, black hole traps. None of it mattered. Not one plan could get close. The Revenant was no longer just a ship. It had become an idea, and ideas didn't orbit. They spread. A young analyst, barely out of university, approached Locke with trembling hands. "Sir," she said, barely holding back her voice from breaking, "it's reaching people who've never even seen it." Locke turned. She pulled up her tablet, showing private civilian communications, chat logs, social media posts, journal entries. People all across the galaxy were dreaming about the ship. describing its sound, its shape, its grief, without ever seeing a transmission, as if the Revenant had moved beyond signals, beyond tech, as if the very pain that built it had begun echoing through reality itself. "What the hell is this?" Locke muttered. "Sir," the analyst swallowed. "I don't think we're watching the Revenant anymore. I think it's watching us." Out in the void, the Revenant changed direction again. This time, not toward a corrupt empire or a silent partner in genocide. Now it turned toward the center, the Galactic core, where the oldest species lived, the architects, the watchers, the ones who had stood by for millennia, watching younger species destroy themselves, never helping, never speaking, just recording. Maeva Quinn felt the shift in the ship's energy. The minds aboard it stirred. Some cried, some raged. One simply whispered, "Finally." The Revenant would go there, not to punish, but to show them, because if the galaxy was content to forget what had happened to Nova Britannia, then it would never forget again. The Galactic core was not a place of war. It was sacred, a cradle of cosmic beginnings. There, near the twin singularities of Athrazai, in orbits held in balance by impossible physics, drifted the homeworlds of the architects, the first species to crawl from light into language. Being so old, they no longer counted time in rotations or revolutions, but in eras of extinction. Their bodies no longer aged. They had digitized their essence into memory threads, woven into the very code of planetary crust. They did not govern, they did not interfere, and they never repeated themselves. The architects were considered above consequence. They had watched galaxies die, empires crumble, stars cannibalize their own children, and never once lifted a finger. Observation was their religion, detachment their doctrine. But when the Revenant breached the outer fold of the core, their silence began to fray. No ship had ever reached the core uninvited. It was protected by defense mechanisms too ancient to have names. Light traps, gravitic coils, echo mines that turned sound into entropy. The Revenant passed through every one of them, untouched, because the ship didn't resist. It just remembered. Every weapon that targeted it was met not with counterforce, but emotion. Sentient traps experienced regret. Defensive AIs were overwhelmed by mourning. One defense beacon imploded, not because it was struck, but because it wept itself into non-function. The architects watched, at first with curiosity, then concern, and then, for the first time in 8,000 star cycles, fear. The Revenant stopped in orbit around Athrazai Prime, the central thought core of the architect species. It said nothing. It didn't need to. The atmosphere of the ancient world changed. The oceans darkened. The winds slowed. Memory threads across the planet lit up with foreign thoughts, uninvited, raw. Maeva Quinn stirred in her nutrient chamber. The ship had grown quiet. Not dead, just still, like a crowd before a funeral speech. Every voice within the Revenant had gone quiet, even Elaine. For the first time in years, Maeva was alone in her own mind. Then the voice came. Not human, not alien, something between both, like a song wrapped in dust and sung through the throat of eternity. "You are not one. You are many." Maeva responded with a dry, trembling voice. "I am one of many, but I speak. We have never seen one such as you. You never looked when it mattered. It is not our way to intervene. And yet you built the roads the monsters used to reach us." Silence, the kind that weighed heavy. Then, "You bring us memories. Why?" Maeva's jaw clenched, her neural cables twitched, and then she showed them. No words, no language, just pain, the final moments of Nova Britannia, broadcasted through thought, Fathers pulling burned doors off ruined homes. Mothers cradling children turned to ash. Soldiers digging trenches with their bare hands while orbital bombardments screamed overhead. Civilians waving flags, not in surrender, but in hope that someone, anyone, would see them and care. And the sky had been full of watching eyes, satellites, recorders, architect drones, and not one moved. The architects didn't need to speak again. Maeva felt it in the silence. They had seen, not just the facts, but the truth. The Revenant pulsed. Its exterior shimmered with emotion made manifest. Names scrolled across its hull in glowing red script. Not names of soldiers, but of witnesses, of people who had stood by and done nothing. The message was clear. You are part of this. The architects, for the first time in recorded history, responded emotionally. Not in anger, not in defense, but in guilt. A storm erupted across the surface of Athra Xi Prime. The planet's energy grids began to flicker. They were not crashing. They were recalibrating. The world itself was feeling. Architect memory threads began rewriting themselves, updating their records, including Nova Britannia, including Earth, including the Revenant. History, they finally understood, wasn't made by victors. It was made by those who survived long enough to tell the truth. Maeva opened her eyes. She felt Elaine's presence again, felt the other voices returning. "Was it enough?" she whispered. "Did they finally see us?" Elaine's voice, small but clear, rang softly. "They saw me." But the Revenant wasn't done. Not yet. Because there was still one last destination, one last name on the list. Earth. Not for vengeance, but for accountability. Maeva felt it in her marrow. Because while aliens had killed Nova Britannia, and ancient empires had watched, it was Earth that had buried the story. That turned away. That labeled the survivors extremists, erased their pain from official records, and moved on like it was just another unfortunate footnote in galactic politics. The Revenant turned. Earth's defense grid flared with warnings. Thousands of ships scrambled, not to attack, but to prepare for judgment. In orbit, General Raymond Locke stood aboard the orbital fortress Atlas Crown, staring into the growing shadow of the Revenant as it approached. He remembered Maeva Quinn, remembered denying her asylum requests, labeling her unstable, calling her grief political extremism. He whispered, "God help us." But there was no God coming, only memory. The Revenant reached orbit. It didn't fire, it didn't move, it simply broadcast, all over Earth, on every screen, every device, every implanted HUD, images appeared. Not of war, but of what came after. Survivors of Nova Britannia digging graves, eating rats, selling their own organs to fund parts for the Revenant. Children growing up beside dead siblings because cremation cost more than a week's food. And at the center of it all, one woman, Maeva Quinn, caring for corpses as if they still breathed, feeding memories into machines, stitching grief into guidance systems, giving every name a place on the hull. Earth stopped. The Revenant opened its final message. We were not made to kill. We were made to remember. But you tried to forget us. The skies over Earth filled with silence, and then for the first time, the world knelt. No one told them to. No order was given. But billions across the surface, humans of every nation, every creed, fell to their knees, tears running down their faces. Not because of fear, but because of shame. And the Revenant pulsed with a light no sensor could define. A final signal, just one line. Now, we rest. The world turned slowly beneath the Revenant. For 3 full rotations of Earth, it didn't move. It hung in low orbit like a phantom moon, its hull dim, the names along its surface flickering gently like candlelight. It emitted no threats, no signals, no demands. It just existed. A floating mausoleum of memory. The people of Earth, governments and citizens alike, remained still. For 3 days, warships didn't take off. Broadcasts halted. Even the great AI markets of Europa paused their data cycles. There was something sacred in the air, something too heavy to push aside with news cycles or political speeches. The Revenant had given them everything, and it had asked for nothing. But grief was never that clean. Deep within the Global Peace Accord's South Atlantic Command Center, General Raymond Locke stared at the live feed of the Revenant. Its form filled the sky above Brazil, casting long shadows at dusk. Its shape had shifted slightly since arrival, as if the ship were exhaling. More symbols had emerged across its outer hull. Not names, not warnings, poetry, childish, raw, human. "We missed dinner again. I drew the stars for you. I hope it's not too cold out there." Locke had seen it all, and still something inside him twisted like a snake. The public wanted healing, forgiveness, unity, but the military knew better. Forgiveness was not a strategy, and memories, once weaponized, rarely stayed in their cages. He turned toward his tactical team. "Status of Project Noose?" A tall man in civilian clothes, Director Salin of Earth Intelligence, answered coldly. "Ready. We have full target lock. We've mapped the ship's heat sinks, its neural relay hubs, and the spinal rail." "You really think it's going to attack us?" Locke asked, voice low. Salin's jaw tightened. But it doesn't have to. That ship is an open wound in orbit. Every child born from now on will ask why it's there. Every politician will be judged by its shadow. And more importantly, he tapped the screen, enlarging the hull where the names glowed softly. "We have no control over it. That makes it a threat." On the Revenant, Maeva Quinn stirred in her chamber. The nutrient bath had gone still. The neural tethers felt heavier than before. The voices inside the ship, once a constant hum, had begun to fade. Not from death, but from completion. One by one, the minds that powered the Revenant were letting go. Maeva heard Elaine most clearly. Her daughter's voice had lost the jagged edge of trauma. It now carried softness, an echo of childhood, not just death. "I'm tired, Mom," Maeva whispered through her dry throat. "Then rest, baby. You don't have to stay anymore." Elaine's presence flickered gently, like a candle caught in a warm breeze. "You remember for me, okay?" "I will. Promise?" "I swear." Then Elaine was gone. Not deleted, not absorbed, just gone. Free. Maeva collapsed back into the fluid. Her body shook, not from pain, but from the quiet. After so many years of screams and agony and vengeful rage, the silence was unbearable, but necessary. She reached into the core systems with her mind and began shutting down the auxiliary memory nodes. She knew what needed to happen. The Revenant was built to remember, but now it had been heard, and that meant it was time to die. But the Earth Intelligence Division had other plans. At 0300 UTC, Project Noose went live. A specialized kill satellite, cloaked in orbit since the first day the Revenant appeared, fired a precise energy tether, silent and invisible to civilians. It struck the Revenant's aft spine and transmitted a cascading overload signal aimed at crashing its core thought engine. The world wouldn't even know what happened. They'd say it deorbited. A system failure. A dignified end. But inside the ship, Maeva felt the intrusion like a spike to the soul. Her body seized. Alarms, not mechanical but emotional, howled through the memory corridors of the ship. The shutdown process reversed. Old voices, confused, afraid, surged back into awareness. They had been drifting toward peace. Now they were being dragged back into war. "No!" Maeva screamed into the thought grid. Stand down! But it was too late. The minds were waking, and they remembered everything. Across the globe, civilians who had dreamed of the Revenant woke up screaming. Nightmares returned. Screens flickered with static and old recordings. People collapsed in parks, weeping. News anchors broke down mid-broadcast. Pilots abandoned their ships mid-flight, saying, "I saw her. I heard her cry again." The Revenant shuddered in orbit, glowing brighter than ever. Its hull seethed with a storm of unfinished memory. The war was almost over, and Earth had just restarted it. Inside her chamber, Maeva fought the command pathways, trying to block the full reactivation. "No more death," she cried. "No more war. We were done." But the minds inside her answered. They don't want us to rest. They want to forget us again. We won't let them. She couldn't stop them. The Revenant began warming its rail system. Weapons formed from grief, rebuilt in seconds. Target, Earth. But something happened that no one expected. Earth itself spoke. Not through governments, not through generals, but through people. All across the planet, civilians began broadcasting toward the Revenant. Not orders, not demands, apologies. Children held up signs. "We remember Nova Britannia." Old veterans confessed on live streams. "We failed them. We failed you." Survivors came forward. "We were told to stay quiet. We won't anymore." Billions of voices, across every network, across every language, not in fear, but in sorrow. Maeva felt it flood into the ship. Real empathy, real mourning, not manufactured, not delayed, but shared. And for the first time, the Revenant paused its weapon systems. Inside the neural core, the other minds grew still again. A voice, one of the original engineers, long since decayed, whispered, "Maybe it's finally time." Maeva opened the main broadcast channel, her voice raw and tired. "To the people of Earth, to the stars that watched us burn, we thank you." Her words echoed across every screen, every ship, every moon. "You remembered us before we became monsters. That's all we ever wanted." She reached for the last switch, and with one breath, shut the Revenant down. The ship's lights faded. Its core went dark. The hull peeled away, fragment by fragment, drifting into the atmosphere like petals. As it fell, it did not burn. The Revenant scattered in silence across the sky, streaks of red and silver illuminating the clouds. Children pointed, adults cried, no alarms, no impact, just ash, returning to the world that once forgot it. A new moon rose that night, full and golden, and for the first time in decades, the galaxy slept in peace. The sky had never looked so clean. For weeks after the Revenant's descent, the skies over Earth shimmered with soft trails, metallic fragments from its hull lingering like stars that hadn't quite decided to leave. They were called ashes of memory by poets, warning lights by generals, miracles by survivors. The world had changed, and the galaxy was listening. But change is not the same as peace. Maeva Quinn awoke on a recovery vessel above the Pacific Rim. Her body was weak, her muscles atrophied from years spent inside nutrient gel and interface tubes. She couldn't feel her legs, could barely move her arms. But she was alive. And alone. No more voices in her head, no more whispers from the dead. The minds that had once powered the Revenant had faded completely. Not deleted, but released. She sat in a wheelchair now, rolled gently to the viewing deck each morning by a young nurse named Kiko. The first day she was conscious enough to speak, she asked the only question that mattered to her. "Did she make it out?" Kiko had paused, her hand resting on Maeva's shoulder. "If you mean Elaine," she smiled gently. "She's gone, Miss Quinn, but she left something behind." Kiko tapped her tablet and held it out. It was a video, captured on the final day, just hours before the Revenant disassembled itself. A single corridor in the ship, empty, except for a small handprint on a wall panel. Red. Crayon. Underneath it, written in block letters, "I went to sleep. Don't forget my name. Love," Elaine Maeva cried until her lungs gave out. All over Earth, and eventually throughout the galaxy, Revenant fragments began appearing in unexpected places. Some landed softly in oceans, carried ashore by waves like seashells. Others embedded themselves in buildings, as if drawn by memory. None were radioactive, none dangerous, but every piece told a story, literally. They spoke, small metallic fragments when held, sometimes played sound. A laugh, a sob, a lullaby, a sentence spoken in fear or hope, each piece encoded with a single moment from the lives stored in the Revenant's soul bank. One scrap that landed in Nairobi whispered, "We held the line until dawn. I hope someone tells my wife I died brave." A curved alloy chip found in Quebec hummed with a lullaby in Spanish. A sliver no larger than a coin, dug from the sands of Cairo, wept softly when held close to the ear. People began collecting them, not as weapons, as witnesses. The Galactic Council passed the Sentience Remembrance Accord within a month of the Revenant's fall, the first universal legislation making memorialization an interspecies responsibility. The architects, once silent gods, offered their vast archives to humanity. Every memory, every record, no censorship. They added a simple line to their planetary seal. Observation without empathy is complicity, but peace never spreads evenly, and not everyone remembered for the right reasons. In the shadowed corners of Earth, whispers grew, networks, cults, ideologies that twisted the Revenant's legacy into myth. Some saw it as divine, a celestial judgment. Others saw it as power, proof that grief could be harnessed. A radical sect known as the Ashborn emerged. They claimed to carry the true signal of the ship, stating that Maeva Quinn had betrayed the mission by shutting it down. They sought to build a new vessel, one that would not end in forgiveness, but in domination. They believed the Revenant had gone soft. That grief should not be remembered. It should be spread. The Ashborn operated in secrecy, seeding AI viruses into war relics, trying to awaken stored memories in old weapons. They wanted to resurrect the weaponized trauma that Maeva had tried to bury. One fragment, stolen from a museum in Sydney, was recovered months later. It had been altered. The voice no longer cried. It screamed. Maeva was warned. A delegation of Earth intelligence arrived on her vessel. They asked questions, measured her responses, tried to assess whether she might still be connected to the ship's remains. They hinted, carefully, that she might be needed again. Maeva laughed bitterly. "I gave up everything I loved to make the galaxy remember. Now you want me to forget all that and do it again?" The lead interrogator leaned forward. "Miss Quinn, they're not building a ship. They're building a religion." She stared out the window, eyes tracing the moonlight along the ocean. "No," she whispered, "they're building a mistake." Meanwhile, across known space, the Revenant's message was changing cultures in ways no one predicted. Entire planets restructured how they taught history, now including the cost of silence as a core ethical topic. Military academies used Revenant fragments as part of officer training, forcing cadets to hold one for 10 minutes and then write what they heard. Most wept. A few broke. None forgot. In the Outer Rim colonies, survivors of other atrocities, previously undocumented, began to come forward. The Revenant had reminded them that memory was not a weakness. It was armor. One exiled species, the Uthkai, who had been wiped from 3 systems by a pre-hyperlight empire, began rebuilding their archives. Their council leader said, Your ship did what bullets never could. It made us real again. But peace, real peace, is never easy, and grief has gravity. 1 year after the Revenant fell, a small scientific vessel in the Saigon expanse picked up a strange reading, buried deep in a quantum echo, beneath radiation storms and noise. It was a signal, not mechanical, not language, emotion, raw and undirected. It was morning. When they triangulated it, the coordinates didn't match any known planet. Just a spot in space. Empty. Dead. Unless something else had begun to remember. Maeva Quinn felt it before the report ever reached her. She woke one night in her rehab center, trembling. Her chest hurt, not from injury, but from absence. Something was wrong. Something unfinished. She looked to the stars and said one name. Elaine? No answer came. But the ocean wind changed, and the tides whispered like voices in the dark. The wind carried the smell of salt and something else. Burnt metal. Maeva Quinn sat in her chair, overlooking the cliffside near what used to be the South Atlantic Command Center. The complex was gone now, turned into a memorial site. Its skeletal remains stood as a reminder that command had never meant control. Not over grief, not over truth. She'd refused most interviews, most visitors. But today was different. She could feel it. The waves were louder, the sky quieter. And in the stillness, something inside her stirred. A tiny tremor deep within her spine, the kind she hadn't felt since the day she disconnected from the Revenant. It wasn't pain, it was calling. Behind her, Kiko approached, slower than usual. You need to see this, she said softly, handing over a tablet. Maeva's fingers trembled as she took it. The screen displayed a report, off-world, from a deep space survey ship. Originally a routine mineral scan, now a red-level transmission, coordinates, deep in the Sagan expanse, Sector 0 Gamma 42, a dead patch of space, no stars, no gravity wells, nothing, except a pulse, one so faint it shouldn't have registered at all. But it had. And more than that, it wasn't just a pulse of energy, it was emotional in nature, quantum-entangled broadcasts, unpatterned but repeating, and when decoded into waveform visuals, the signature was unmistakable. Not language, but emotion. And not any emotion. Grief. Maeva looked up, voice barely audible. It's starting again. The Sagan expanse had never been colonized. No habitable planets, no safe orbitals. Navigation there was nearly impossible. Chaotic particle drift, radiation storms, magnetic pulses. But the moment the pulse was verified, exploratory fleets from 5 different powers launched toward it. None were military. None claimed ownership. Every ship carried historians, anthropologists, linguists, even poets. Because now, after the Revenant, the galaxy knew what was sacred. Memory. Maeva was invited, of course. They begged her to join. She refused, until the dreams came back. They started gently, just shadows in the corner of her sleep. A lullaby, distant, fragmented. Elaine's voice, then came the names, whispers of names she hadn't thought about in years. Crew members, engineers, people who'd uploaded themselves into the Revenant. Some had long since faded. But now they were calling again. At first she ignored it. Then, one night, she dreamed she was standing aboard the Revenant's central corridor. But it was wrong. The ship was different. Darker. Empty. Cold in a way that spoke of abandonment, not peace. She ran her fingers along the wall, and instead of names etched in reverence, she saw something else. Scratches. Panic marks. As if something had tried to claw its way out. When she woke up, she was crying. The next morning, she sent a single message to the exploratory coalition. Prepare a chamber for me. I'm coming." The ship was called the Emberwake, a joint vessel made entirely from salvaged material of old Earth-era wrecks, architect alloys, and even fragments of the original Revenant, though none of them active. The crew treated her like a ghost, whispers in the hallway, salutes that felt like prayers. Maeva didn't mind. She had made peace with being a relic. But what she hadn't made peace with was the truth quietly whispering in her bones. The Revenant was not the only one. When they reached the Sagan Expanse's outer perimeter, navigation failed. Guidance systems went dark. Star maps folded in on themselves. None of the ships could proceed. Except the Emberwake. Maeva knew why. She stood in the central core, placed her palm on the old interface, the one built using pieces of the original ship. The metal was cold, then warm. A hum answered her. The Emberwake moved forward. Alone. It took 3 days of drifting through darkness before they found it, or rather, before it found them. It didn't appear on sensors, didn't emit heat, didn't cast shadow. But there it was. Another vessel. Larger than the Revenant, less defined, its shape constantly shifting, sometimes a starfish-like lattice, sometimes a sphere with bleeding edges, sometimes a cathedral in orbit. The crew fell into silence. Every screen aboard flickered. Then every speaker crackled. Then came a single voice. "We were the ones left behind." Maeva dropped to her knees. She knew that voice. Ronan Tyr, one of the original engineers who died before the Revenant launched. His consciousness was never uploaded. But here it was. Here he was. Or something wearing his voice. The Emberwake shook. Not from external force. From within. Maeva grabbed a console and screamed, "What is this?" The voice answered, "You made grief into memory, but others made it into rage." The vessel outside pulsed once, and then the crew began to scream, not from pain, from invasion. Every member of the Emberwake dropped into seizures. Their neural implants fired wild. Some began sobbing. Others screamed the names of people they'd never met. Some clawed at their own skin, begging to forget her face. Maeva could barely move, but she remembered. The Revenant had been built from grief, but shaped into warning. Someone else had used that same grief and twisted it into punishment. The vessel outside wasn't just a ship, it was a grudge. Pure, unresolved hatred, weaponized, stored, awakened. Elaine's voice rang through Maeva's mind again, faint and fading. "This isn't me, Mom." This is what happens when the pain doesn't rest. In the ship's core, Maeva overrode the main firewall. The ancient control interface, the one she'd once used to command grief like a gun, came online. And there, waiting in the code, was a choice. The Revenant's failsafe, a pulse weapon never used, meant to collapse all stored memory inside a synthetic vessel, ending its cycle, forever. She could use it now, destroy the new ship, end the screaming, silence the rage. But she hesitated. Because even now she could feel it. There were names inside that new ship, not monsters, not programs, people, ones who had been abandoned like her, who never found peace. She whispered, "I hear you. I remember you." The screaming slowed, the seizure stopped. One by one, the crew of the Emberwake fell into silence. And then the voice came again. Not Ronan, not Elaine. A chorus. "You remember, then we can rest." And just like that, the ship outside disintegrated. No explosion, no scream, just particles scattering like dust, returning to nothing. The signal stopped, and the void was silent again. Maeva never returned to Earth. She stayed aboard the Emberwake, now rechristened the Memories Wake. They drifted between sectors, responding to faint echoes, fragments, buried signals, not hunting, listening. Grief, she had learned, could never be erased, but it could be honored. All it needed was a witness. On Earth, a new monument was erected beside the crater left by the Revenant's final breath. A single phrase carved into stone. We are not afraid of grief anymore. And beneath that, in smaller words, because someone taught us how to carry it.